I don't think I can get used to this toilet. It's nice it keeps wiping your butt for you, but...
Sponsored in part by UPS. This is a green whistle, and can unlock the very potential of any hollow that I play it around. My friend Alan, unfortunately, didn't make it all the way down the abyss, but still has the drive to do so. Also too, we're only going to use Alan whenever there's an emergency. No homo. If any time that I feel like the scene is becoming too uncomfortable, I will blow Alan. And also, no, I don't know any other way that I can make that not sound as possibly gay as it did sound. So for example, if I were to play it, it would unlock the very purpose that dwells within any hollow. This goes for Nanachi, MIDI, and all types of hollows alike.
Why, hello.
Wait, didn't you die? How are you still a hollow?
The abyss affects your soul. Therefore, I can turn into a hollow whenever I please. So you called me?
Listen, Bondroot, if you ever hear this, no, I will never call you. Don't you have children to torture or something?
Come on, it was only 1,600 times. Everyone's so sensitive nowadays.
Yeah, sorry you guys had to see that. Anyways, where were we at? Oh yeah. Hello everyone, Mr. Blubberjack here today, and today we will be talking about Made in Abyss for the 4th time. And the reason why the large gap isn't just due to the copyright, but I actually had to research a hell of a lot for the sake of this review. So for example, we know our main characters are Riko, Reg, and Nanachi. But when it concerns the second season, it does follow a different set of main characters. 2,000 years ago before the current events of the series. One of the biggest reasons for why I did so much research for the sake of this review was because on my first initial watch of the second season, I really didn't like it. Every single bit of the important story went right over my head. And not only new languages, new customs, and not even just new people of the current events, but new people even from the past. This story does have an A plot and a B plot, but they connect in a sort of surface level sense. But when it comes to the overall theme of what exactly the characters that we're following are going through, from as much as I was able to research, there's not that really many parallels when it concerns Riko, Reg, and Nanachi to any of the past characters, ranging from the characters of Iramui, Fuiko, Wazukyan, and Belov. If there was any hint to as if there was a theme between these two stories, maybe it could be overstepping one's boundaries in a good way versus a bad way, and what I mean by that is super broad. For example, we know that there's a lot of uncomfortable touching within the show, right? It borders on a very weird, reprehensible, and strange. And if you're just getting here, welcome to Made in Abyss for you. I created this counter because there's a lot of times when this happens. And this is my theory of how the show tries to communicate its themes, but in the most surface level way possible. In the more complicated way, our main characters, Riko, Reg, even Nanachi, are seen as illegally transgressing against this abyss. They had never asked for permission in order to go down here, but they're doing it anyways. It also does put their life at jeopardy, and they could die at every turn. The series is always reminding us that these main characters do not belong here. Even with as dangerous as it gets when you go down to the darkest depths, even just rising is a challenge altogether that could possibly even lead towards death. But here's the weird part. Not only are the characters trying to intrude on the abyss itself, but the abyss at the same time is intruding on these main characters' bodies. I mean, does that sound weird? That's pretty weird. Maybe it's a stretch as a theory as far as how the themes are concerned, but as we all know, the characters are not safe, but also this means it in the most reprehensible way possible because of the lolly representation here. But it's not even just that. There is actual true body horror within this thing. But what's odd to a certain way is that anything that is penetrated within this show, to some odd extent, is signing an invisible contract. Every cave raider knows when they go into the abyss that they could die at any moment. But to parallel that with the abyss, The Abyss is aware, and if it actually has a soul or not, that any cave raiders will exercise their ability to take any riches or relics from this place, basically prompting the Abyss to challenge them if they can survive. But by the point that you get down to the 6th layer, and yes, there's a lot of layers to this, the penalty for error becomes way more paramount. Cave raiders, or at least human beings in every sense of the word, were never meant to exist on the 6th layer, because not only can you not leave with your human form, the very wildlife here has unimaginable strength, including even the water itself is an organism. And yes, both of those things will lead to your demise. Because with that being said, the story that takes on the characters from the past essentially devolves itself into a huge tragedy. And this tragedy does persist even into the present day. But constantly there is this leap in logic that you have to persist with in regards to what qualifies as a wish, what qualifies as spirituality. I'm not going to say that relics are a bad introduction to the series because obviously Reg exists and he's some kind of super relic. We don't understand him, but that's part of the journey. We want to get to understand him. But when you have relics that outright give you a wish and are more unexplained than anything else, because yes, this is why I had to do a deeper dive into this entire season, more than I did at least the first season and hell, even the first movie. And I'm not going to straight up say that the second season is bad. Oh hell no. The characters I truly do connect with, and it's very touching for what exactly they go through. I thought everything that was done 2,000 years ago was masterfully crafted, even with the emotional gut punch hitting me harder than it did with Mitty. Because down in the 6th layer, it is rumored to have a city made of gold, and it can make anything as valuable as gold. But of course, we don't mean that in a literal way this time like everything else, including the relics. We mean that in the most spiritual way possible. The value of whatever you find down there becomes just as meaningful as if gold were there. This basically has to do with the relationship that you made along the journey. I mean, this isn't strictly just relationships, but at the end of the day, we all know what this is. And possibly the secret ending to One Piece if we ever get to that series. But oddly enough, even though it was rocky and every single relic actually was literal in the sense of what kind of magic it presents, the true magic, which was the spirituality of this show, that only really shows itself near the end, was undoubtedly the best part about this show. But it does suck that you have to go through a lot of unexplained riffraff just to get to the good stuff, because otherwise I would have dismissed it as a bad story altogether. And trust me, the lolly content sure did not help with that. Even for a second, I kind of felt like the second season was exactly what a lot of people would mock this show for. Because as much as I may have adored anything that the show would have offered, when it came to the A plot and the B plot, I felt like they just did not sandwich together. I was kind of afraid of making this review in general, because I thought that there was going to be a lot of bad mouthing made in Abyss for what this second season was. And I guess you could sort of call me a Made in Abyss apologist, because even amongst that first viewing of the second season, I knew that there was exactly something I was looking for that was quality, but like finding gold, it took a lot of digging in order to find it. In fact, I would probably go to say that this isn't the main reason for why people like Made in Abyss, but at the end of the day, if you do your time and due diligence when looking at this second season, you would like it a lot more. This obviously is beyond the end of the video, and almost as if I'm explaining it in this way just wraps up my opinions right there, but I want you to go along this journey and see it for yourself on what you think about it in the way that I present it. Because there are certain things that I do want to explain to this audience, the ones that are watching this video right now, because this series takes a while to actually get to those points, and I want to make sure that you guys understand the concept of whatever this series is trying to teach, mainly in the sense of value. Now, just harping on the actual philosophy of value, a lot of people view value in a lot of different ways. An argument posed by Jean Baudrillard in his book in 1981, Simulacra and Simulation book, proposed that all thoughts of what value was totally inadequate. His work presented that value wasn't just determined by how much work went into a thing, not even the nature of its materials or hell, even its overall usefulness. No, value is measured on its overall appearance as value. Down to the very brands that you wear on your shoes, value is determined as it exists in relation to other images. And why do we place so much value on gold? well, not only is it a mineral and it's a rock and all that good stuff, it might be one of the strongest metals, but it melts extremely fast. But hell, do we love looking at it. And also too, not a surprise, Made in Abyss uses this logic to its finest conclusion when it comes up with its own value theory. This value theory has a way of measuring an object of desire, the growth of many objects of desire in general, whether you add or it just develops over time, the crystallization of value, in other terms or other words, money, or at least that value is kept at the same degree that it was always. You could possibly think of this as purity. You even have the value in which creation and destruction happen in the form of chaos. This is where something is valuable just for its very ability to change anything. But for Made in Abyss, you have the most rare value out of all, the kind of value that is irreplaceable. This value is known as the soul. So, in short, you have Shi, Ku, Gutsu, Mae, and last but not least, Haku. These will be important to know for later on. But also too, I'm not sure how you guys see souls, but I see souls rather differently. I talked before how I don't exactly agree with the way that this series prefers the afterlife. And hell, you don't have to agree with me either, this is just the way that I see things. The way that I see a soul is that it doesn't exist within inside of you, and rather, it's a thing that people demand onto you as their own authority. Everyone's mind establishes meaning and order to the world that we exist in. For example, if you were to see the sky and you were to see the ground, you would call them they're both respective things, but combine them together, you get a horizon. But when it concerns people, this doesn't just only apply. This applies in every single aspect, even their past, their present, and their future, not just the way they look. Being able to judge one's soul, or at least if they have one, their actions to some extent have to be unpredictable. And what I mean by this is that you understand what they've done in the past. You can see how they are in the present, and you sort of try to predict what they'll do in the future. Even beyond the physical realm, a person is usually considered dead when their actions cease to actually exist anymore, thus making their entire identity and soul very predictable. But even when someone actually physically dies, if their actions are still carried on, to some weird extent, their soul still lives on. But this is the way that I see souls, and probably not the way that Made in Abyss sees souls, because we do get an instance where somebody's soul is replicated. I'm not going to spoil it for now, but we'll get there when we get there. I mean, it fits within my logic, but I can't always be sure about other series, you know? But one of the few things I do want to mention before we jump into this is the wish-granting orbs, which, yes, grant you a wish. But apparently you do need to be a juvenile in order to activate the wish, because if you're an adult, your worldly thoughts for some reason will turn you into a tree. I have no idea why that's the case. Yeah, you see, I think it's these wish-granting orbs that cause me the most confusion when it comes to this series, because for some weird fucking reason, they kinda just do whatever they please. And typically, when a character wishes for something, unlike Dragon Ball Z, you have no idea what they wish for. So you know what that means? I gotta work even harder to make this video because I gotta start establishing some lore and complications and explanations for what exactly is going on here. But this is the finished project. Am I supposed to like it for what it's supposed to be, or rather just what it is? Because what we have here is not exactly plot holes, but plot blanks. And funny enough, after my deep dive of studying Made in Abyss, upon other YouTubers, I don't find anybody talking about this. But honestly, does anybody really want to go in depth with this series on uncovering even the most obscure aspects about this show? Like, what about that birthday disease with the bent neck lady? What was the resolution to that? Of course, that was in the first season, but since I watched all the movies, I pretty much skipped that whole thing. But in case if you're wondering about that little munchkin kid, yeah, he's totally fine. He's okay. But again, there's a lot to this series that is not explained because the story is not complete yet. So to some weird extent, you can't exactly be mad about the misinformation when, assumingly, all of our questions will probably be answered. Who knows when, though? Although, I could probably solve this whole problem by reading the manga more in depth, but amongst my research, I've discovered that the manga is way more extreme than the anime ever was. Like, full-on nudity. And if you ever wanted any confirmation on the writer's checkered past, yeah, it's checkered. But again, the pure enjoyment that I get from making these videos is the ability to turn the series into a video series in general. I like the ability to freely use these clips to my own dismay, and honestly, if the journey is worth it, I might cover some manga stuff. You know, just to fill in the blank on all of this shit. Specifically, the other side of the story with Ganja 2,000 years ago. Unlike the actual anime, I will be explaining the story in the order that it was meant to be discovered in. That way we can do without all the damn flashbacks and the concealing of information that I think is integral to actually enjoy this series, and not have it exist as a Siamese twin on the ass of this thing. Because the citizens of Ganja are one of the first cave raiders to actually exist. And let me tell you, they have no idea what they're getting themselves into. Our main characters are the three sages. Three sages because they are very spiritual. We have Wazukan, who is the lead priest, and Belov, who's not hard on the eyes and is sort of like a second in command. But then you have Fueko. I know I said I would dispense with all the lame backstory, but for the sake of this character, she was absolutely molested and abused by this man, which would ultimately culminate with her being infertile. Along with that, she's not exactly comfortable with having her way with men, so she is technically a lesbian. Well, why the heck does that matter? Well, it does matter. Like it or not, Fueko could never have the ability to have her own child. With this being the case, she does ultimately feel like trash, or a chewed up piece of gum that's just waiting to be thrown away. But one of the three sages, Belov, reminds her that something isn't beautiful because it's beauty, and something isn't ugly just because it is ugly. They both come to the conclusion that beauty is within the eyes. And hell, wouldn't you know, the eyes are the gateway to the soul. True value at its hardest. That man that tormented Fueko for so many years when she was a child asked her if the abyss could truly turn something like her, a used up little girl, into something that is perceived as gold, or hell, turn her into it. The entire crew of Ganja might as well share that same sentiment, because everybody here were essentially kicked out and are banished from their own Ganja place. Although with Fueko joining alongside them, this absolutely changes the course of everything, because she holds the compass that leads to the very abyss itself. And for all those that watched my first video, you'll remember that Rico freaking lost that thing a long time ago. And even to this day, it doesn't exactly have any true significance, until being used as a bartering tool for information from this native tribe, an indigenous group that the outcasts of Ganja accidentally end up coming across. It might not be so very fair to call them a little bit backwards as a society, but along with not really knowing English, or in this case Japanese, there is this other little girl that was banished from them. Belov reveals that she has wounds and a tattoo that basically reads that she's infertile. Judging based on the stature of this little girl and the very fact that this indigenous tribe definitely doesn't have an X-ray or an MRI machine to speak of, I guess age of consent is totally up in the air with these people. Yeah, of age my ass. Either way, with her being casted out, they hesitate to bring her on, but Fueko convinces them because she's a native. She might actually know this place a lot much better than they do. In fact, she does end up showing her usefulness, letting them know about the curse and every other monster that comes around. Because judging based on how the main characters in the present day had so much trouble getting down here, it seemed kind of unlikely that they would even survive themselves. But all behold, they actually find their way making it towards where we were in the third movie. Leaving these guys to not only discover Ito Front, but surprisingly finding a nearby hollow with a white whistle. Like before in the third movie, you need a white whistle to descend towards the 6th layer. But trust me, that's as easy as it can possibly get. They end up coming across these robots, but surprisingly, the robots don't really mean any harm. Their whole purpose is to actually acquire data and touch and feel and research, shockingly in a very G-rated way. Oh my god, he's fucking dead. Yeah, with them finding out how much more dangerous it is down here, they contemplate the idea of going back up, but ultimately, they're not very surprised that the people who went back up and came back down ended up looking like hollows. Because as we know, this is the layer where your humanity cannot return. But luckily, if not, this is when we start to find out that these robots can quickly start to understand human language. Yeah, these guys weren't joking about acquiring data and learning. They call themselves interference units, and basically with them had never been able to see humans before, this is a golden opportunity for them to learn about humans entirely. Let's just hope that this isn't another Tesla robot situation, because the last one I got, let's just say a lot of PTSD, booze, alcohol, and a whole shitload of guns. Let's move on. They therefore believe that this is the golden city that they were awaiting upon, and with that, they do not traverse any further. But this does make it a problem, because since they can't really go back up or even traverse up in any sort of altitude, this also breeds the worries of actually traversing even further into the abyss. Also too, they don't exactly know how high you should go in order to get hit by the curse. At the very most, they know that the robots can't be affected by the curse, but surprisingly with foreign writing on the walls, the little girl is able to translate them. But along with that, on the journey she starts to learn a little bit of English and at the very most gives Fueko her full name. Okay, probably not full, but at the very most, this little girl is named Iramui. Shockingly, there was residents of the 6th layer, but they're no longer here anymore. Also, it wasn't that the interference units didn't know what humans were at the time, but rather, they had seen a different amount of humans with different clothing and different patterns altogether. In fact, the very humans that existed within the 6th layer had patterns on their bodies, which can explain the tradition of Iramui's people putting patterns on her. But enough with the dry lecturing, we got this cute animal to look at. Look how nice it looks, it's like a little bunny rabbit. In actuality, this is what's known as a hermit dweller. From this point, they keep these little things around to understand how they could survive these harsh conditions, because at this point, they're low on food and they have no water. So they take care of that, and they also go out to hunt, which at this point allows them to finally feast. Although strangely enough, after the feast, Iramui starts to comment on how she's not feeling well. Gently caressing into Fueko, Iramui comments on how Fueko smells like a mother, but not just any mother, a mother who had been mating with other males. Ah, jeez, what the fuck, why you gotta out her like that? But Iramui starts to exposit her past, talking about how she could barely give children, and her brothers and sisters were nice to her up until the point when they examined her. When it was recognized that she was infertile, she was completely abandoned and shunned by her entire family, and heck, her entire tribe. She was titled by them as cursed. They went even as far as to not call her a child anymore. And in order to calm Iramui's anxiety, Fueko comments on how she also can't bear children, although Fueko doesn't believe that she could possibly replace Iramui's mother, but Iramui doesn't ever want to be thrown away like she was before, and says that she doesn't want a replacement for her mother. She wants Fueko. And like that, my heart had sunk. I am completely sad and crying. This was a very important and emotional moment for these characters, including me as a viewer. And honestly, this is the scene that cements Iramui and Fueko's relationship from here on out, and it's what makes it so believable as a mother and daughter dynamic. But as time will pass, they will continue to live in the 6th layer, continuing to feast, and unfortunately, Iramui's hermit dweller does eventually get eaten, leaving behind nothing but bones. Fueko geniusly decides to turn the bones into a necklace, but after that bit of tragedy, turns out the sickness has finally caught up to Iramui, because with her temperature at its absolute highest, she is also suffering from diarrhea, and after an uncomfortable touch of the diarrhea, it turns out what's inside are little eggs. And strangely enough, a good amount of the other villagers are also suffering from the exact same thing, being a little bit further within the process, ultimately turning their arms and hands and limbs into a sort of molted lead. But oddly enough, it's totally rock solid. They also inform Fueko that the other villagers have completely turned into sort of tree-like characters. They would later then find out that the water itself is actually the thing poisoning them, despite the fact that they even boiled it. And as for the tree people, it turns out they were holding on to this egg. So, it turns out the very water that they were drinking was an organism in itself. And this egg is also a relic that can grant wishes, but not the wishes of anybody who is of age, but rather the wishes of a child. So long as the egg does not make direct contact to your skin, you're totally fine. And as for the water, they're left with two choices: die of absolute thirst, or die of absolute poisoning. With the effects getting even worse for Iramui, they ultimately decide on giving her the wish-granting orb. But upon receiving it from Wazukan, he gives her this look that can only be described as divinely possessed. But you know, scorching temperature, water not absolutely being up to quality and not being filtered, I think anybody would probably look like that at the end of this day, am I right? But once they give Iramui the wish-granting orb, by the next day, when Fueko wakes up, she finds that Irumyuui feels totally fine, although there is something kind of wrong with her. The wish-granting orb had completely morphed into her chest, and all the pain that she was feeling before had absolutely disappeared, even to the point where she's playing around with the lead poisoning. And this is at the point where the suspicions of Wazukan and Belov come to the conclusion that Irumyuui had made her wish. But here's the thing. Nobody knows absolutely at all what Irumyuui had wished for. And with everyone continuing to get even more sick, once Fueko comes to check up on Irumyuui again, Irumyui's body is entirely deformed. I don't know what the heck that is. Fueko asks Irumyuui what exactly did she wish for, but Irumyuui only responds with the fact that she's happy that Fueko is just there. But all behold, turns out her body was actually morphing into something that was capable of giving a child in Irumyui's image. But hold on, this isn't the only caveat. Turns out Irumyuui, since she's a child, only thinks about the very basic concept of giving birth. And turns out this is sort of a monkey's paw situation, because every single baby that she gives birth to, yes, looks just like the little rodent that she had as a pet, but it also is born without any internal organs, leading to all of the baby's demise. One after another, it was at this point an inevitability that amongst the babies being born, they will die, and she would have to relive this nightmare every single day. Her truest desire, and rather her wish, was the ability to give birth. But it looks like whoever made this fucking egg never gave it an autocorrect feature, and what's even worse is that Fueko is finally succumbing to the same poison. Although surprisingly, while she was in her sleep, amongst eating a certain type of food, her symptoms immediately evaporated. Amongst waking up from all the sickness, she would find Wazukan just standing outside. With Fueko making up her mind on what exactly she had just eaten, Wazukan goes on to tell her that everything is fine, that everyone got a chance to get every single bit of it. And if your brain is starting to make connections right now, yes, he had fed everybody a bit and a piece of Irumyui's dead children. He had fed everybody a bit and a piece of Irumyui's dead children. And not just the dead ones, the alive ones. Because apparently the amount of freshness matters as well, and by cooking the alive ones, you can slowly start to fix the poison within inside of everyone's body. And whereas Wazukan is totally unfazed by this, a man that is willing to do anything at any cost, Belov is completely demoralized and heavily regrets his actions upon eating Irumyui's children, saying that he could not resist. Because it's like they say, our wishes do dwell within life after all. Because shockingly, Irumyuui no longer looks like Irumyuui. In fact, she is totally deformed into a giant pink monster. Upon giving birth, she lovingly embraces every child that she makes, but of course, by this point, they end up taking the alive baby from her, causing her to cry even more. Fueko, obviously mortified by all of this, contemplates on either killing herself or killing Irumyuui, but is ultimately unable to do that, and what we have here is truly a horrific situation at its finest. An entire travelers group ended up cannibalizing a young little girl's babies. Add that on the fact that it's even darker in the sense that nobody exactly knows what's going on with the little girl's body. And shockingly, Wazukan ended up finding another wish-granting orb, which he placed inside of Irumyuui in hopes that this would strengthen Irumyuui, since she was also growing weak at the same time that Fueko was sick due to the poison. There's a possibility that Irumyui's health might be actually altered by the well-being of Fueko, because simply what's more important to Irumyuui than just the children is Fueko herself. But this is where things become a little bit more stranger to actually explain. Irumyuui, out of anger or desperation, ends up actually moving her entire body away from the hut. Everyone, of course, follows her, with some casualties on the way there, but non-surprisingly, with the only one that could not bear the weight of eating her children, Belov asks for Irumyuui to punish him, which in this strange way, I can't even be sure if it's a punishment, because he gets turned into a hollow unlike no other. Wazukan basically tells everybody to follow Belov with inside of Irumyuui, but Fueko really doesn't want to do that. She feels like all of this is totally wrong, and is a bastardization of her very body as a result, which leads Fueko into wanting to kill herself, But before she could do that, Wazukan grabs her and reveals that he had used the wish-granting orb, but obviously it didn't have the desirable effects on him. Reiko would then wake up inside of Irimui, in the deepest, darkest depths, where she was kept as prisoner for the while being. Wazukan basically spills to her that this place is where Reiko can have the deepest connection with Irimui and her children, those who were born and those who were not born yet. And due to the very nature of Wazukan basically using the wish-granting orb, his arms are slowly maturely turning into wood, but his entire body is mostly fine, due to the very fact that he's inside of Irimui. And this is where I start to theorize and come up with explanations for what I believe happens. With Irimui had finally absorbed every single village member that there was, she could read their souls inside and out, and within that time, actually deviously came up with a different wish for the other orb inside of her. This orb would no longer be for the wish of creating a child, just for the sake of making one, but rather to carry out her revenge. This child, like it or not, whether it's in her nature, is born with the same ambition as her mother. Bearing an appearance that's similar to her mother, she is an extraordinary creature of her own kind. She is capable of self-regenerating, and overall, despite the cuteness, is an absolute death weapon that is meant to take out everybody who is living with inside Irimui. As she traverses the 6th layer, she comes across one of the interference units that at least she had yet to actually destroy. Not long after the fact, they end up becoming really good friends, but friends out of mutual benefit. In exchange for resources and supplies, the interference unit agrees to give the little girl information about her mother and the language that she used to speak. Because while the interference unit needs more materials in order to be adequate, for Irimui's child, reading, and specifically speaking either English or Japanese, was an absolute, thus allowing the interference unit to finally teach her the value of values. Irimui's child took a huge interest into the idea of Haku in general. Irimui's child took a huge interest into the idea of Haku in general. But if you're wondering why I haven't even been saying any names as of now, well, that's simply because neither of them actually have a name. So with that, the interference unit comes up with a name for our little princess, Faputa. Fao, as in noble maiden, and Apta, the immortal one. Those two words put together ultimately come in the meaning of the princess that does not perish. So, with this, Faputa likes her new name and gives the interference unit a name of his very own, Gabarun, which apparently in her mother's tongue means a servant, or at least a guard. But yeah, don't get it twisted, Faputa is way stronger than this interference unit, Gabarun, but for the most part, he still holds up his end of the bargain, because unfortunately, in the midst of protecting her, he got crushed by a giant monster. But shockingly, walking out of the shadows comes Reg. This apparently was all taking place right before he had gotten to the top of the abyss. Strangely enough, Reg is speaking a foreign language, but in actuality, the ones who are speaking a foreign language is Faputa and Gabarun. The both of them in due time end up learning Reg's language of English or Japanese depending on what sub or dub you're watching, and honestly, there's a lot to pick apart in this scene altogether. Not sure if you exactly remember the values that I listed at the beginning of the video, but Haku was one of the most important. For example, Gabarun didn't exactly have any symbol drawn on his cheek when he met Faputa, but now he actually does, and it's in the form of Haku. And I can only assume that Faputa was the one that drew that on him, cementing him as a genuine person inside of her heart. And also, strangely enough, Reg actually had the name Reg before Riko named him. Apparently, Reg is the name of a dog that Riko had, but this still calls into question, why exactly is Reg Reg before Reg was Reg? And the only explanation for that, if I try to connect the dots, is that most likely Reg's mentor, which he does state that he had a mentor, was possibly Eliza, and perhaps mother like daughter, both of them ended up naming Reg after their either deceased or disappearing dog. Apparently keeping in line with royalty, for some weird reason, Every time that Faputa finishes a sentence, she'll say Sotsu at the end. What exactly does it mean? I have no idea. Apparently, it's the world's tradition in regards to royalty, so I don't have to look too deep into this. Along with that, Reg gives her a little bit of whatever he has on his head. I'm convinced that they're goggles, but I don't know for sure. Either way, just to cover up her chest. And they both pay a visit to Faputa's mother. Reg notices the same symbol of Haku plastered on the doorway of her mother. Faputa goes on to tell Reg that Haku is what you attach on to the most important person in your life. Faputa goes on to say that she was born from 3 eggs, so thus she has 3 Hakus that are important in her life. That doesn't make any sense because she was born from 2, but hey, I don't even know if to argue this point. But didn't she just technically come from 1 egg? I just don't get it. Why would she say this? Anyways, Reg is confused. If Faputa's most important person is her mother, then why exactly should Faputa kill her? But Faputa explains that the people that live inside of her are essentially doing it against her wishes, causing Aramui to suffer greatly. Her mother can't do anything but just stay alive for the residents that live there. Back that on to the fact that Faputa can't exactly re-enter into the womb, so she does ask Reg if he can accomplish this task for her. But Reg hesitates and says that he doesn't want to use his firing Malaysia because he doesn't know exactly how powerful it may be, in fear that it might go too out of hand, no pun intended. So, at the very most, he promises to Faputa that he will come back and help her kill her mother. And along with that, Faputa makes him also promise to come back so that they can make babies and ultimately they can go on a grand adventure themselves. And if all that didn't sound weird to you, I don't know what will. So as Reg leaves, Faputa continuously makes rock Regs just so she doesn't feel alone while she's down there waiting for him. But obviously, with as much time has passed since the series had started, she had been waiting a long time. With as much time has passed since the series had started, she had been waiting a long time. But with that being said, coming back to the present day, Riko, Reg, and Nanachi are in this altar and they're on their way to the 6th layer. But hold on, let me not exclude Prushka, who is now a white whistle, including her little Pokemon, Minya. But for clarification down the line, Prushka's soul is basically within the white whistle, so she's not completely dead as of now. And apparently amongst going in there actually is a food smell coming from the middle. Apparently, Banju can also see through Nanachi's eyes. This explains how he was completely aware of everything that our main characters were doing up to this point. Reg, you motherfucker! Wait, why the fuck are you sniffing her? And given the name that this is the Sea of Corpses, they end up coming across a bunch of frozen bones.
To be honest with you guys, I didn't actually think we'd ever get this far. But I knew we would make it!
Yeah, you'd make it, but Reg is missing a full-on arm that he's oddly able to control despite the fact that it's severed. Man, these cyborgs are just getting even more advanced nowadays, aren't they? Well, no matter how advanced that he is, nothing's gonna stop Minya, the Pokemon, from pooping on the altar. But apparently, Minya isn't the only one that has to take a shit.
I saw.
You know, this is one of the times that I say welcome to Maiden Abyss, but honestly, I'm more dreading this moment. But after that act of disobedience, they finally make it down to the 6th layer, with surprisingly, the temperature and weather and overall environment being the absolute opposite of Edo Front. It's scorching here with 100-degree heat, but as our characters are walking along, Riko finds this place ultra fascinating. She keeps nerding out over the rock formations and how this place looks like it used to be a city. Those are pretty sharp eyes, because we now know that there were people that lived here in the 6th layer, but surprisingly, they're nowhere to be found. Also, since the riptides, or if you want to call it, the curse, is actually stronger down here, this makes it incredibly easy for Nanachi to sense that there are other creatures watching them, possibly other monsters, since she's able to read their consciousness from so far away. They all get a move on, but Riko exclaims that the map has finally reached its limit, and there's less information in regards to not only the monsters, but exactly what location they're at. Riko says that they all made it down there in one piece, but I would argue against that. Reg is missing an arm, Prushka is missing her entire body, and honestly, I can imagine what would happen if we ran into another white whistle at this point. But before even if that were to happen, they come across a terminate dragon. This is an extremely powerful monster. They have terrible poisonous scales that rupture upon impact, they're very tenacious, and they move with absolute freedom even when it comes to the curse. Yeah, that's definitely a spawn of Satan. How about we start on the easy mode? What about these Mesojacks? Apparently they live by geothermals, whatever that is. Apparently they're extremely docile, and as far as eating them is concerned, their eggs are at least edible. Alright, scram all of you. If I've learned anything from this series is that we're all going to eventually eat children at some point. Although, judging by how much it's moving, it doesn't exactly seem freshly laid. Wait, what the fuck? Honestly, I thought that was somebody screaming for a second. Well, remember those things called geothermals? Yeah, this is what it is, a giant balloon of lava, which amongst popping, releases a bunch of fireballs. Jeez Louise, the 6th layer sure does have its surprises. But apparently that's not all. Amongst hitting the ground, they actually release a bunch of poisonous gas. And unfortunately, these oversized bubbles are just getting started, so we gotta look for cover. Okay, so which one of you viewers are gonna be the first ones to tell Rico, Reg, and Nanachi that the water might be poisonous? But god dang, you guys didn't warn them fast enough, because they already used it and they're already cooking the damn things. But judging based on how everything is apparently supposed to survive this place, it wouldn't leave me shocked if these eggs didn't have their own weird ways of surviving heat. Which yes, they do. Because amongst Rico opening one of these eggs up even after it's boiled, the baby inside is still moving. Since Reg has the most indestructible body, he's the first one to taste test it, and for the very most, it continues to move in his mouth, but he does ask if Rico could flavor it a bit. Rico then uses one of those Cliff Bars from the Edo front, which Nanachi really disagrees with. That food might as well remind her of all the bad things that had happened to her. I don't know about you, but diabetes is calling my name, so let's fry it up and give it the old black treatment. Which obviously leads Nanachi to loving the ever-living fuck out of it. No, stop, don't give her the water, it's actually poisonous. In due time, you guys are gonna be shitting out eggs. Literal eggs. Rico talks about how she used to eat something that was like this back on the surface. Apparently on Cave Raider Memorial Day, they would end up cooking something, and she talks about how Nat liked the food so much that he ended up taking other people's. But then that leads Nanachi to asking exactly who is Nat, which if you remember my first review, he's that little whiny bitch from earlier. Rico, why the hell did you draw them like that? What, is the other kid bald? But after thinking about them, Rico starts to feel a little homesick. So Nanachi basically tells Rico if she wants to send another letter to them, which gets Rico hell of excited to actually do that very thing, prompting her to calling them Team Rico. But going back to the letter that Rico wanted to send up to the surface, which they successfully crafted, but despite the oil that they put on it to keep all the birds away from it, surprisingly, that wasn't enough to keep it away from all the other monsters. This does bum out Rico, but they all agree at that point to get some sleep. But as they're all walking into their den, it turns out that there is another monster that's looking at them from the distance. And yes, this is Faputa. Amongst Reg, Rico, and Nanachi sleeping, Faputa sneaks into their den. Yeah, motherfucker. Okay, that moment doesn't really call for it. Faputa then wonders why Reg didn't exactly come to her amongst entering into the 6th layer. She then finds Rico sleeping alongside them and wonders if this is Reg's Haku, because apparently Faputa can actually sense the soul within a being, and yes, even suppress her own soul so that nobody knows of her consciousness. This is what allows her to sneak right past Nanachi and Reg, despite the fact that their senses are already heightened. She comments on how Rico has a similar soul to her mother, but that Rico's soul is a little bit strange. After taking Prushka, she then checks out Nanachi, wondering exactly what this one is, if Rico is exactly Reg's Haku. But then apparently she discovers that Nanachi smells extremely well, saying if Reg already had Faputa, why exactly would he have another? Taking out the note that Rico had designed herself, Faputa then goes on to mark the value that she believes that these two carries. So she gives Rico Haku, understanding that this is a soul that Reg does value, and I'm not exactly sure how to take this, but she labels Nanachi as she, essentially just calling her a valuable object in itself. But as for Prushka, Faputa takes her along with her, and without really knowing what a white whistle is, Faputa understands that within the rock, Prushka can't exactly vocalize her needs, so Faputa takes the stone to Gabarun, which Gabarun knows that in the village there is somebody that can transform it, making it into an instrument. Faputa doesn't like the idea that she does need one of the villagers' help in order to transform this thing, but ultimately says that it's unavoidable. And the way she asks Gabarun to fix the stone for her is kind of adorable, I'm not gonna lie.
Please help.
But apparently, why Faputa asked for Gabarun to take it to that place where her mother is, this is in hopes that upon Reg seeing Faputa's mother, he'll then remember everything that he was supposed to do. And as additional insurance, Faputa creates a beast repellent out of the other two's hairs, since they're not as strong as Reg, and there's a lot of dangerous creatures down here. Now, if you're wondering why she's going through all this planning, instead of just simply talking to them, she is apparently very shy, and doesn't like a lot of eyes on her, which, funny enough, makes Gabarun absolutely pity Faputa, which I can't help but feel the same way. Amongst the crew waking up, Nanachi is one of the first. She notices that it's their letter, and she has no idea how it got there. Along with that, there's also a bunch of weird writing on it. But now, we understand that this is Haku and this is she. And right alongside Nanachi's confusion, Riko wakes up and can no longer find Prushka. From Nanachi's perspective, she assumes that whomever had done this takes them for idiots if they're dumb enough to leave clues behind. And wait, hold on. Wait, where's Alan? Are you serious? Did Faputa really steal Alan? How does that even work? I'm the one reviewing this series. You know what? Now this is personal. At this point, it's up to Reg to sniff out the problem. Because yes, he can smell extremely well, even to the point where he was able to smell the minerals and the fat that was still left on the writing. Although, by the time that they find their next clue, it's unfortunately in a place that wouldn't smell all that great. This is where they end up finding out the strands of hair that was taken from Riko and Nanachi, but as they traverse even further, they find the giant footsteps of Gabarun. But from their perspective, they have no idea what this is, because they eventually make it to Irimui's tower, noticing the same mark, and as they cross the bridge, Reg can actually hear Faputa from a far distance away. The only one, of course, that can't hear it is Riko. Even Nanachi butts in on this, and says that she heard a faint sound as well. Once they get closer to Irimui's membrane, which is essentially the doorway to this place, Nanachi notices that the tide strings are totally in disarray, meaning that they're not exactly active where they're at. Once they get inside, they notice that a bunch of human bones are being hung all across the place. But of course, that's only just the entrance. When they're fully inside, they can see that there is a bunch of other weird creatures in here. One of these creatures has the gall to actually come up to our main heroes and ultimately recognizes that they're cave raiders. This creature is known as Majikacha. He's a hollow, just like Nanochi and every other creature that's in here, although noticeably he's more mechanical, but this isn't actually his true body. His spirit dwells within inside, so he has a vessel. Riko asks Majikacha if he's the one that actually stole Prushka. Majikacha is more confused by her words, which leaves Riko to narrowing it down to Prushka, then a white whistle, then ultimately telling him about her life reverberating stone. At least with that kind of lead, Majikacha is able to direct them towards the location of where they keep all the other life reverberating stones. Come to think of it, Alan didn't exactly look like a finished instrument, so he could be there as well. In this case, Majikacha lead the way, which does involve him going up a couple of stairs. This worries Riko, but Nanachi is able to see that the curse is no longer here. This also means that she can't exactly read anybody's consciousness, so she tells Reg to stay on high alert. This does lead Reg into wondering if these guys are hollows. Nanachi says that she's not sure because they seem oddly intelligent for hollows. This is Porion, and he spends the most of his days just carving away at other stones. Reg rightly freaks out a bit, but apparently Riko gets the sense that Prushka doesn't exactly mind it. Apparently Prushka as the stone is not in her truest form. Before we go any further, I gotta consult this guy about something. Hey Porion, I have a green whistle. Do you know where that is? Whoa, this is it? Wow, Alan looks new? I'm not the biggest Zelda guy, but thanks anyways. Giving sound to a life's will takes in the form of carving out a white whistle from the stone. or in other words, carving it into a musical instrument. Not sure if you noticed before, but this is why Alan has taken the form of an ocarina. When a whistle is a musical instrument, it allows for it to be more precise with what it does. After this point, Majikaja introduces them to the marketplace. This is where value is exchanged. As they look around the marketplace, Riko ends up finding a page from her mother's book. Although the shopkeeper Gaumi, who actually owns it, starts freaking out when Riko touches it. Now, of course, Riko wants that piece of paper, but Majikaja goes on to tell her that as long as she has the value that's equivalent or better than it, she may be able to purchase it. Riko looks on herself and wonders if there's anything that she could possibly give to barter for it, but then Majikaja creepily starts to say that Riko herself is very valuable as a human little girl. Apparently her eyes, her ears, her skin is all valuable, and Majikaja will happily buy those away from her. But Riko stops him right there, saying that she wants to get down to the abyss with everything that she has on her body. And yes, including her body. Graciously enough, Majikaja concedes, and laments on that stealing value is the worst kind of crime imaginable. But Reg is still suspicious because the whole issue of Prushka has totally dropped. So he proposes that they act like they're interested in almost everything just to get more information out of him. And shockingly, Riko ends up finding a bunch of hermit dwellers. This is what Iblitz is selling. And apparently, these cute little creatures just keep on crawling all over him. And as you can guess, there's a lot of other creatures around here that value different things and basically try to sell them. And apparently, one of the things that these hollows do value is the very things that's on their bodies. Because apparently when you become a hollow, you become a manifestation of what your desires represent. But a lot of the people here became hollows upon entering, which ultimately means that no one can really leave. No one at least but Riko, Nanachi, and Reg. But this also basically means that every hollow here dreamt of reaching the bottom of the abyss, but got stuck here. Oh no, not Ma. Okay, is it just me or are these guys getting a little too friendly? Well, unfortunately, not all of them because Minya ends up getting smushed. Apparently, Minya's bones are extremely soft and oh, come on. Oh. Okay, how many uncomfortable touches do we have so far? Oh, wow. I didn't even realize it got that high. But apparently, when it comes to valuable things inside of Arimui, there is a balancing. Just think of it as insurance for anything that happens in here. For whomever had ruined the value of such things, they will have to pay it back in the same amount. And what happens if you can't pay back that value? Well, bro, I wouldn't even wish this on my worst enemies. What are they doing to this little thing? Bro, what the fudge? Everybody's happy about this, but Majikaja does feel like they should be compensated for what they just gone through, giving them crystallized value with the 3 slashes. After that point, they work out some details to find somewhere to sleep and eat, with Riko figuring out exactly what she needs to say in order to get these guys' attention on where they should go. Here we have Mopopohan, and she is essentially the landlord for what is a motel for hollows. Butthole-licking toilet and disgusting sewer water food. Honestly, kinda reminds me of the room I rented in the hood. By the way, I'm assuming that the food content here is the same as Irimui's children. But I don't think that the writers are paying that close attention, so Riko, Reg, and Nanachi don't exactly experience any symptoms from the water that they drank earlier. It would have been nice if they did, some little connection would be nice. Riko does experience a bad stomach and ultimately diarrhea, but this is actually typical for her, and she did this on the surface as well. With a jacked up Minya and a jacked up Riko, this leaves Reg and Nanachi to themselves. But then they notice that all the hollows are gathering outside, and a large earthquake starts to erupt. Majikaja lets them know that it's most likely Faputa. Faputa is known for going everywhere but is rarely seen. This helps Nanachi at least piece together that Faputa might have been the one that stole Prushka. Reg encourages Nanachi to go with him, but Nanachi doesn't like the idea of leaving behind a sick Riko and a sick Minya. So Reg goes by himself. As Reg escapes from the membrane, he sees that Gabarun actually struck the entire tower altogether with his laser. Quickly, Faputa pins Reg down to the ground. Shit, it's the 8%. This allows Reg to get a good look at her, but also apparently Faputa smells like the sun. But honestly, I don't even know how to even not visualize that, but actually put that in my mind in a psychological sense. What does the sun smell like? Does it smell like the beach? Does it smell like hot dogs cooking at the park on a sunny day? I have no idea. But Reg is at least surprised that this hollow is put together as much as Nanachi is. And of course, the last time that Faputa had saw Reg, he had both arms. Now that he only has one, Faputa is definitely concerned for him. Amongst talking to each other, it definitely shows that along with Reg forgetting everything, he also forgot about Faputa. But like before, Faputa doesn't like many eyes on her, so she takes Reg back to her den. But while that's happening, Nanachi and Majikaja are in the marketplace, looking for water and food and other supplies for Riko and Minya. They have a conversation about what exactly the balancing is all about. But in like Rick and Morty fashion, it's dependent on whatever is valued by the individual. Irimui's entire tower body is able to read every soul that goes inside of her, but that does call into question, what if somebody values something at an astronomical rate that just isn't realistic? But Majikaja goes on to tell her that every individual, every soul, has their own truth. So just like that Rick and Morty episode where they went through a detoxifier, the detoxifier can only read that something is toxic depending on the own user's definition of what is toxic.
Motherfucker! See? They're living in pain.
So those rules definitely apply here when in terms of value. This prompts Majikaja to asking Nanochi what exactly she values. At first she says Midi, but then she goes on to say that the rest are Reg, Riko, and she could barely care for the rest. Well, yeah, okay, fuck Prushka then, Jesus. But Majikaja goes on to say that he wants Midi as well, and that she smells very good. Majikaja goes even more in detail, saying that the masked man, who's most likely Bondrewd, left her behind here, but unfortunately is being kept by one of the three sages, Beloff, prompting Nanachi to ask Majikaja to take her to him. Cutting back to Reg and Faputa, they're both inside of her den. Faputa is still enamored at the fact that Reg has forgotten pretty much everything. Although, as I said before, Faputa can read souls very well, and there's a probability that the Reg that she knew is possibly not even this Reg. Of course, it's the same body, but we have heard Reg say before that he's had other consciousnesses running around in his thoughts back at Edo Front. So there is a possibility that the Reg that we're following just isn't the one that we knew at the beginning of this video. And like before, he can learn things from his other personalities, but yet totally not have the memory of those personalities entirely. This is why Faputa wants to check if Reg is actually the Reg that she knows. For all she knows, this could just be a clone or whatever have you. Okay, she needs this? For sure. Oh, wait, you need that? Okay, this scene is getting a little weird. Yikes! Okay, that's kind of uncomfortable. Oh, no. What do I do? Do I blow Alan? Like, maybe there's a... Well, thank God I don't have to do anything because Reg is finally tired of getting violated. Considering on how upfront Faputa was about her intentions with Reg, this has left me with the conclusion that yes, Reg and Faputa were definitely romantic lovers. There's only just enough information there to imply or speculate. With how far this series is willing to go when it comes to these kids, I'm glad it doesn't go any further than this. Heck, other stories, including other anime specifically, are not a stranger to having uncomfortable realities about the past, but rather authors would subliminally enter those messages or ideas into the backdrop just so it doesn't take center stage and make it absolutely rated R.
Are these monsters gonna kill me?
Not as long as they think you're a monster.
Huh? That's kind of racist.
We'll talk later.
Even animes such as One Piece does have these moments, but they're very sparse and in between. Uncomfortable realities such as slavery, racism, even for some reason the occasional lolly representation. But just remember, there are other stories that are even more extreme than Made in Abyss, even when it comes to its most reprehensible ideas. Because all the uncomfortable stuff within Made in Abyss is more in the backdrop compared to even other mangas that are commercially released and do present even more crazier ideas that are at the forefront. Is it probably bad that something like Made in Abyss actually exists? Yeah, most likely, but I'm pretty sure most people acted the same way when Bulma got her panties totally taken off by Goku and also her vagina exposed to Master Roshi. And last I checked, Bulma at that time was only 16. Heck, even going on to something even more tame like The Simpsons was totally given backlash for its not safe for work attitude. Even the movie itself, cringily, showed Bart Simpson skateboarding naked, and yes, you see his dingling.
I like men now.
Characters, just like their authors, are not always morally upright, but that doesn't make them bad, and I would argue there's a lot more that you can learn from not only characters but authors themselves that write with absolute freedom regardless to social conventions.
Miss Swanson, how does it feel to be competing today? I can't tell you how free I feel now that I've started identifying as a woman.
As they're able to present ideas and situations that could challenge the status quo, but rather, despite the degenerate flaws of the creator and the things that he creates, no one's perfect, and if we stomp out the absolute freedom that artists are capable of, at least to the point where it's presenting a good story, then gone are good stories. But the thing that flies in the face of my argument that I'm making right here is this infamous scene where Rico is essentially getting molested by these hollows. The scene speaks for itself, it's degenerate, and this was truly when I questioned, how the hell did this even get made? Okay guys, we're gonna work on Made in Abyss Season 2. Alright, let me know how you're going in the process so far. Hey sir, there's a scene here that we're supposed to animate, and it's kinda... Oh yeah, animate that. Sir, you're joking. Did I stutter? Getting back to the story, that creature, or at least that hollow that totally hurt Minya, is a good guy, and basically tries to enact their wrong by saving Rico. Rico and this new character Ma are now good friends. In a similar situation like before, Rico is now on the lookout for Reg and Nanachi. Ma acts as her helpful companion down here where the hollows are, and brings her to a place to at least eat. This is Mugi, and she's one of the first hollows that we actually hear speak English, or Japanese if you're watching the sub. And also, we do have an unlikely presence that's here, Wazukan. But right after that, we cut to a scene of Nanachi actually meeting Midi. But there is this common thing known as the rule of 3, so Rico, Reg, and Nanachi all have their own separate stories happening at the same time. But with that being said, Reg is basically surviving the mortal combat of that giant dragon we were talking about earlier. It quite literally chips his arm, which honestly shouldn't even be possible, and essentially bullies him off of a cliff. This is where Gabaroon comes to Reg's rescue. They both converse with each other and uncover and confirm any suspicions or questions they may have about one another. Reg is quite fascinated that Gabaroon basically looks like a more built up version of him, and even though he asks for information about how Gabaroon was created and how he possibly was created, Gabaroon doesn't exactly have those answers. But Gabaroon does notice that there are some similarities between him and Reg in design. Apparently, the only difference between him and Gabaroon is that Reg can freely go between different layers, but Gabaroon can't. Back inside of Iramui, Rico is there uncovering and learning some of the language that they use. And I'm not gonna lie, ever since they got here, I've been more amazed by their skills in general. Not only Reg's ability to smell and overall senses of hearing, but Rico definitely has a case of photographic memory when it comes to learning new language and customs. But of course, after that's all said and done, she still is on the lookout for her friends. Mugi points her to the location of where Fueko is. And if you guys do remember since the beginning of this video, she is all the way down in the bottom depths. Although, apparently the biggest reason for why there are not many hollows down here is because they instantly start dying or get sick upon being here. But luckily, Fueko tells them that she at least got a signal from one of her two friends that are here. Although in order for Fueko to actually guide them there, she needs to take off her chains, but she can't do that alone. Rico first asks Fueko if she's a bad person. Fueko doesn't know exactly how to answer this question, except with saying that this entire city has a very horrific history. She backpedals and essentially confirms that she's not a good person, but Rico frees her anyways. This is sort of like a scene to show that Rico doesn't care if you're a good person or a bad person, but if you're willing to help, she's totally okay with you being around her. With that in tow, after Fueko finds some clothes to wear, she brings him to where one of her friends is, and we know that Nanachi is in there. Although, with it had been a long time since this whole entire city was created, Fueko doesn't exactly feel comfortable with a lot of people recognizing her, so she chooses to step back, and Rico goes inside instead. Rico is surprised to see that Nanachi is completely knocked out with a full-blown, well-healed Midi by her side. Apparently what had happened is that once Majikaja brought Nanachi here, Belov was consistently consuming from Midi. Of course Nanachi doesn't want Midi to suffer, so she ends up selling herself in exchange for Midi. But the obvious question here that I would always ask myself is how exactly was Midi able to even get down here in the first place? And I definitely know that Banju did not leave her all the way down here, because obviously if that was the case, we wouldn't have seen her in season 1. But apparently due to the balancing, Belov had a bunch of his body removed as a form of payment in order to have Midi born down here. I'm assuming after she ended up dying up there. And I am honestly not sure how this is actually a thing. I'm not sure even in the show's rules how this could actually happen. But hey, it's here, and her soul is functionally replicated. Yes, her soul is replicated. But ignoring that huge leap in logic, Riko wants Nanachi back, and hopefully even Midi at the same time, so she tries to offer a piece of whatever she is to Belov, which Belov asks for her whole entire body, of course. Although Riko tells him that he's being too greedy, and Belov backs off a bit because he admits he was being a little too greedy. He'll only ask for half her organs, 2 of her legs if most, and maybe her eyes. She can choose between those 3. Jesus, I feel like I walked into the Shark Tank version of Saw. Riko laments on the 3 choices and ultimately is about to make her final choice until Majikaja stops her from making that decision because he's seen other cave raiders that have made this sacrifice and never came back from it. But after that, one of the monsters ends up coming inside the town and totally dismantling it. This is called a Fizushipu. With this monster in existence, it provides a rare opportunity for Riko to show off her smarts on how to dispatch it, and with none other than her new white whistle. It is not the whistle itself that actually deals any damage, but rather, it's able to unlock the true purpose within all relics, including Reg. Upon Riko blowing Prushka, Reg shows up automatically and starts fighting the monster, but at that point the monster is already dealt with by Riko. Also, if you're wondering why she has such short hair now, that's because she used it as a form of payment to pay Majikaja and many of the other hollows to help her with this task of defeating this monster. After the inevitable defeat of the monster, Riko then tells Reg that Nanachi is being kept by one of the 3 sages. But that 3rd sage will only give Nanachi back as long as he's compensated with something that is valuable. With that being said, Wazukan tells them that in order to gain something that's more valuable than Nanachi, it'd be a best bet to get a piece of Faputa. Faputa ultimately agrees to help Reg, but only so long as Reg fulfills the promise that they made together. Reg still has no idea what that promise was, but before he's even given a chance to think about it, Faputa just goes ahead and rips off her ear and arm. In a sort of way, it's supposed to show how dedicated she is to her lifelong mission, but in another way, it's kind of ludicrous because Reg is showing that he has no idea what's going on, and the promise that he had made so long ago involves so much violence and cruelty on people that honestly Reg has no intentions of actually hurting. But along the way, Faputa spills out to Reg what exactly the promise entailed. Once Reg gets inside, if he can utilize his firing Malaysia to create a giant hole for Faputa to enter, therefore Faputa can enact her sense of revenge. Although, because Reg is back with the immense value that is Faputa, the balancing is completely out of whack. At the end of the day, however, the balancing is made up of a bunch of Iramui's children, which obviously want a piece of Faputa because they find that immensely valuable in themselves. Because if they sense that she is hurt, they will automatically try to heal her. There is another significant point to this plot, which is showing that that old man that molested Vueko all those years ago apparently has taken the form of a hollow, although this isn't really him. It's just Iramui's imagination of what he would look like as a hollow. And if you're wondering why exactly does Iramui even know of this person, that's simply because Iramui and Vueko were sharing each other's deepest thoughts all this time. But once Reg finds himself pinned down by all of Iramui's children, he has no choice but to use his firing Malaysia to get help from Faputa. Although he is aware that doing this will involve in the city's downfall. So with this, he hopes that he makes the right decision, and after his blast, Faputa makes herself known. And oddly enough, within the glare of the shine on her fingertips, the shine of Haku presents itself. It's a nice artistic detail, and I can't help but feel that it's presenting that she is the ultimate Haku, at least amongst the other hollows that she wants revenge on. Thus, with a giant hole that is within inside Iramui's tower, this prompts for the curse to finally seep in. Whereas before, Iramui's tower would act as a barrier against a lot of things that were outside, including the tide strings. But with the place now going to ruin, with anybody who is even in the slightest highest areas being disintegrated as a hollow, this prompts Belov to finally let go of Nanachi even without the Faputa value. But now with this being the case, Nanachi is given 2 choices. She could either stay there and keep Midi by her side, or go to the outside where the curse is touching, and ultimately Midi will disappear. although in the end, Nanshi ends up making the decision to ultimately leave, making this her last time to ever see Midi again. But thanks to the other little hollows that were kept by Belaf, they made her another hat in memory of everything that was happening as of now. And as they say, it's made out of outside stuff, so it won't disappear. Meanwhile, Faputa is having the frenziest feast of all time, annihilating and killing any hollows that are near her. The citizens of this town must have saw this coming, right? This is absolute Judgment Day. This is Iramui's deepest revenge finally fulfilling. And even though, to some extent, it's mean-spirited and ultimately may be wrong, this is exactly the story that has been building up for a while now. But of course, this very story is in conflict with how Rico and maybe even the audience feels about these hollows. There are other bad hollows, just like Bazukyan and other reprehensible ones, but there are also good ones like Mugi and Porion that help unlock the true purpose within Prushka. Even despite the mistakes that Magikaja had made, he also too was a good friend to them. And ultimately, with the realization that a lot of these other people were cave raiders before they got in here, it helps Rico very much empathize with the rest of the people of the city, thus prompting Reg to protect them, putting Reg in conflict with Faputa. Faputa tells him that he can take her arm to go rescue Nanachi, but for the most part, every other villager that is here is fair game. But with Reg stubbornly not backing down and Faputa not wavering from her very core ambitions, leads these two to regrettably fighting each other. Oh, is Faputa just about to spike Reg? What the? You know, it's not even fucking subtle at this point. This series is really just unhinged. Or am I even more unhinged by just watching the damn thing? Either way, after that weird display, Rico then blows Prushka, prompting Reg to turn into his white form, returning the leverage of strength back to Reg, but ultimately he can't dish out the final blow due to his emotional ties with Faputa. With that, this causes Faputa to motherfucker Reg into being out of commission. After that point, Faputa then directs her eyes towards the hollows that are grouping around Rico. With Faputa having to be forced due to her very ambitions to dismantle Reg, she is now even able to go as far as destroying Reg's Haku, which, if we remember before, was Rico. For all interpretation, Rico is a complete bystander. She's a third party. She has completely nothing to do with what's going on here. And for Faputa to ignore that logic promotes her to become the exact same thing that she ridiculed in the first place. Whereas her mother was a victim of what happened so long ago, she would have been that exact same perpetrator in some sense, even if it isn't 100% symmetrical. But before she makes the dumbass decision to try and hurt Rico, Gabarun interrupts. Even though Gabarun was never strong enough to stop Faputa, he does tell her that if she were to kill Rico, she would then lose her Haku, which was Reg, leaving her in the end with nothing. So to prevent that, Gabarun nearly sacrifices himself. But even with this being the case, Faputa is dead center on killing everybody. But thus another interruption comes in the form of Belaf and Nanachi. But amongst Faputa attacking Belaf, apparently within this world, smells give off the same aroma as memories. In fact, are one and the same. But I guess it's best to assume that the very smells that Belaf gives are not only affecting Faputa, but also every other villager that is there. Whereas the idea before was that Faputa was totally going to kill them, and thus they did not want to die, now plans have completely shifted. With every other person that originated there as a hollow, or even the cave raiders that came here and turned into hollows, with them now understanding the full context of the past and how we know it as ongoers, there apparently is an intense sadness within every hollow once the monsters get through Iramui's tower and start feasting on every other hollow alike. Not sadness in the sense that every hollow is being destroyed by a monster, but the very fact that it's not Faputa does fill them with immense sadness. And if this sounds like the story itself is taking a complete 180 in regards to character development, that's because it is. The things that I would say is that Faputa and thus any other hollow that is here should not know the context of the past of what happened. Thus, with them knowing this, I call out lazy writing. Even Nanachi herself, during the time when she apparently got knocked out from all the incense of Belaf's smell back then, was fed the exact same backstory that we know as viewers. Thus, Nanachi herself is entirely updated with everything that's been going on. This, at the very most, involves Faputa actually having some sense of empathy and sympathy for the hollows themselves. I mean, don't get me wrong, she still plans on killing all of them, But this time, she doesn't mistake them for absolute monsters like she did a couple seconds ago. I felt sadness as a viewer for Gaborone dying, but when it comes to this entire plot and Faputa's whole goal, there's no way that I can absolutely feel sorry for her not carrying out her ambitions of revenge. The anime therefore goes to play it up as it is a tragedy, but this is where my emotions start to fall out of line with the consistency of this series so far. Because with the monsters absolutely dispatching Faputa, they keep her even further and further away from her lifelong ambition. But with even this being the case, now the Hollows are resolute on sacrificing themselves for the sake of Faputa continuing her lifelong goal, because with each Hollow that she eats, she gains strength. And even if it doesn't exactly make any sense to me in the grand scheme of the narrative and how it feels, if Faputa wants to even stand a chance against these monsters, I guess I gotta do my part as well. Alrighty, you ready, Alan?
モカちゃんが教えてくれたいろんな見た目になれるアプリなんだって。
Let's get to it. Thus, after the majority of the Hollows feeding themselves to her, and the music from My Green Whistle, this thus unlocks Faputa's true purpose and allows her to have the strength to defeat these monsters entirely, even thus recharging her with the same icon that is shown on Reg's helmet. So there you go, you get a conclusion for exactly where that icon comes from in the first place. But with this, Wazukian is on his last leg, totally dissipating now that Iramui's tower is totally defenseless. But apparently, if you wanted to know Wazukian's end goal with this all, is to simply become something that was capable of going down the abyss in general. And Wazukian knows that he did not possess the very attributes that involved him getting even further. So he awaited on the day that someone or something or even a group of people could be like what he dreamed of, which took the form of Riko, Reg, and Nanachi and Prushka alike. At least this being an answer for his motivations on why he did what he did so long ago. But at this point, with Iramui's tower totally collapsing, they decide to make their way to the bottom. But unfortunately, the curse has stepped in even to the point where it has now affected Veiko. And also, if you were wondering who the character with the one eye was, that was precisely Veiko's girlfriend. The anime was very lenient about showing this, but this was apparently even the case in the manga. This is why you usually see her sticking by Veiko throughout the entire duration of the second season, and hell, she's even in the opening itself. But with Nanachi and every other Hollow being updated with what the context is between Veiko and Iramui, Nanachi promises to make sure that Veiko gets a chance to see Faputa. Although upon them all meeting Faputa, Faputa does give them one last request, to make sure that Riko, Reg, and Nanachi get down to the lowest depths as safely as possible, because meanwhile she does have to fulfill her final quest, which is to kill her mother, and that she does. After the tower is finally done falling, and the dissipation of the majority of Hollows that are there, finally Veiko and Faputa are finally in the same room, and for the first time in what could be classified as 2,000 years, are able to meet each other face to face. It is ultimately a great scene because Faputa is capable of now seeing what her mother valued most of all. And even at this point, Veiko very much does love her granddaughter, and for the first time, Faputa is able to learn more about her mother unlike ever before. This definitely helped Faputa understand the value of what exactly Veiko had in relation to Iramui, because up until the very end, Veiko had never left Iramui's side. Faputa had thought that she inherited every single one of her mother's ambitions, but for what her mother did ultimately end up forgetting to put into Faputa was the ever-going memory of Veiko. All of the love and all of the friendship and all of the teachings were left for bitter revenge. It turns out that even Iramui did not want to share Veiko, even thus the memory, with anyone, including her own child, showing that Veiko, amongst all else, was more valued to Iramui than even her own dreams. Thus, with this being said, she says to Faputa, calling her Iramui, that she has completely changed her mindset in regards to how she sees herself. Looking into Faputa's eyes, she realizes that no matter the kind of pain and struggle that she's gone through, no matter how much she may think of herself as worthless, the very value and beauty of Veiko resided within Iramui's wishes. That city was never meant to protect the Hollows, but rather it was to preserve Vueko under the curse of the Abyss. But thus, at this point, Vueko finally dies. And Faputa questions Reg, asking if this is not her Haku, then why exactly does she feel this immense pain? But of course, now Faputa understands the value of what we know as viewers, and the only answer to this question can only lie within you. So with that being said, Faputa ends up creating a burial ground for Vueko, and in addition to that, creates a rock Reg as well as a rock Gabaroon, in hopes that this will make Vueko no longer lonely. But amongst an exchange of words between the group and Faputa, after some heartfelt convincing, Reg sort of fulfills his promise to some extent by asking Faputa to join them on their adventure down the abyss, whereas Faputa says she will think on it. Yeah, right. With that Marvel end credits, oh, this character will return, we'll probably be seeing more of her later on. And hopefully copyright doesn't sniff this one out too. If you look towards supporting this series and my ability to review anime in the future, please like this video if you make it towards the end. I honestly don't even care if you subscribe or not, because if it's a good video, it should get to you. And you felt like this was an important video that contributed to your overall development as a person, then I heavily encourage you to like the video so that other people may be able to experience this. And thus, until there is a season 3, this is the end to my Made in Abyss series. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this brief. Hopefully with the kind of shit that I've done to this video, it's able to just at least upload at least the parts that, you know, kind of just aren't copyright. And, you know, yeah, I mean, like, my future of reviewing anime looks pretty grim with this video. But if this is able to do it, you know, and it's able to stay on YouTube, then maybe. But it's crazy because I've spent I spent days and nights on working on this video, and just for it all to not pan out. And there was a lot of things that I was planning on doing. Like, of course, I didn't, like, at the time that I just found out that it was just all going to get copyrighted, I didn't bother adding all the other edited stuff, and it's a miracle that I even went as far as I did with this video. But yeah, the counter was going to be in there. I was going to wear a new different outfit that you see in this intro, this thumbnail. And, you know, it was kind of going to be a fun ride, but, you know, with the footage, of course. Either way, that's pretty much it, and we'll see what I end up uploading next, but for the meanwhile, hopefully this stays on, and I don't have to keep doing things to this. Anyways, see you guys later. Bye-bye. 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 Take care.